Julia with Sirius Dallas Moon. This is Soul Hour, Soul Day. And Chiron has left the 22nd degree. So, everybody that is alive right now, we're probably done with the most risky facets of this decan in terms of assassination attempts, all of the things that I'm tending to basically. I'm not done with that because my Mars is 22 in the ninth house, ruling over the stellium. That's like a permanent native stamp. But for the people that have had points around this degree of Aries, um, most of us are pretty much done. We're pretty much done with this particular area of threat. Chiron was hitting 4 times the degree of assassination in Aries. I know 2 moons of significant leaders there. One is 23, but one is was 22ing. Uh, I guess I don't have exact degree of the moon, but it looks like it was 22ing. Um, I have Mercury, yes, several degrees from there, and hasn't been easy. Um, okay, a lot of my takeaways, particularly with Aries, is that anything that supports uh, being safe and free from rape, anything that supports being safe and free from rape, is preventing assassination in all levels. Um, okay, the notion, because what happens is that when they torture one another in the rituals, they do transcend the personal boundaries, and there is also siphoning of energy, so that can be an approximate of love. And then people feel like one with another, but exactly that point is which leads to an actual assassination. And okay, and this was something that was intricate to me. um, wow. Um, is something that I remember when I was tortured by actually psychologists that I went to. One of my thoughts was, because he threatened my life, was, I'm not making you a murderer. And basically, I was defending myself with that mindset of, I'm not making you a murderer. And and it was um, but this is exactly yes, the situation um, when we talk about whether it is political assassination can be likened to domestic violence because it's the representation of the people that's being assassinated by the people, and this happens in trauma bond and cult like societies. Venus is 18ing here, 18 degrees. And actually, I want to give 2 shout outs. One is to Bellanova, and Bellanova channel is in Italian. So I'm going to give this shout out from Facebook. I hope it wouldn't. Oh, God. Bellanova with Bellanova. This is Maria Antoinetta Bellanova. Um, and you can follow her. I don't want her to be like overloaded with people. Um, but I want to give a shout out. She also has YouTube videos and a YouTube channel. But her YouTube is in Italian, and on Facebook is also for English speaking crowd, for Italian speaking crowd. Um, hello YouTube, for Italian speaking crowd. She has the same name, I think, as a YouTube channel, or I will show her name. But this is another shout out, and this is um, Karandra Marshall. I hope she's going to post more about that. We had a discussion about science and zero rape science. I was coming with the philosophical mindset that it's not philosophical, it's pragmatic philosophy where, hey, wait a second, if all of our scientists grew in some sort of quasi cloning context, and the rite of passage to practice science came a lot of times from trauma, and I do not disinclude myself from that. In fact, I have to go and sift many things that I've known all my life because I didn't have this one particular thing, which is zero rape science. And I said to myself, well, a lot of even quantum, there's this very nice video on quantum field. And I said a lot of the way that we describe physics or we dissociate into physics, I know it for myself. I have 12th house Aquarius. My coping mechanism of dealing with trauma and sexual trauma is science. And and it's actually through scientists, whether it was Douglas Hofstadter writing a book for his deceased wife, or Richard Feynman talking about the fact that only with love he sees the world correctly, also as a scientist. And this is something that affected my thesis a lot. But I did not know love that is not trauma bond. Um, and it was even a challenge when I was dealing with trafficking in academia because people only knew trauma bond and knew misplaced arousal, then I was dealing with what some of them were wishing that they had the chance to, where they don't actually wish they had the chance to, but I couldn't tell them because they were just thinking um, that somebody that was, kind of like a cult leader was eyeing me, and they were just trying to traffic. It was what they were supposed to do in that context. Um, and I was trying to explain to them the difference between misplaced arousal, which is connected to trauma bond, and relaxed arousal, which is, I will later discover, is one of the paths to secure attachment, but we need also to honor the non erotic. And that to me was something that is completely new to my literal ancestry. Okay? There was either safety being knowing that somebody will be there and will be responsible, but not the ability to erotically this would go for a lot of couples, it would go between something that they were people pleasing and not really working on that part to something that was um, to something that would turn as the sexless marriage. Okay. And okay, even when the people looking like a movie stars. My parents both look like a movie stars. So, and this is, I guess, why people did not have the approximation, because it's kind of like when there's a very beautiful woman, nobody believes that anybody would cheat on her, or when there's a very beautiful man, nobody believes that somebody would be feeling raped by them. Okay, even though the Menachem Golan, I think, Jessie talked about this, Jean-Claude Van Damme, that they were with Menachem Golan and they were just collecting money for the lawsuits, even though he was working as a masseuse, he was giving massages himself, and he was sexually harassed. So it's like, but why? Because none of them knew something that's not trauma bond, and those ritual abuses were rites of passage. In fact, in those circles, a person that says, "Hey, I was raped," usually they are the greatest offender. Um, and okay, and in those circles, this is true. In those circles, the people that that people do victimize themselves to harm in those circles. So I mean, it's making it incredibly difficult to say, hey, wait a second, there is a whole new world out there, and it's completely not. Um, I don't even say Satanism because even Satanism probably can be practiced without rape. Okay, Satanism is simply juxtaposing, reconsidering what we think is good and bad. So if Christianity thinks that the raped person is not honoring themselves or a whore, then then actually Satanism would say no, it's actually not the case, or would challenge that notion. But when Satanism is practiced within the framework of misplaced arousal as transcendence, then we miss out on relaxed arousal, and secure attachment, which actually is cohesive truth. Now to my shout out, because I was saying, wait a second, if all science was growing within misplaced arousal, having ninth house Scorpio, which rules sex, then I was seeing how having sexuality that is rapey or cult like or misplaced arousal that can bias scientifically, and then the person that commented to me that has the actual scientific background relevant to my hypothesis, and this is Karanda Marshall 8715. Um, And she says, you honor the field's native rhythm, where most demand its submission. And submission is a big word because the quasi religious, philosophical, spiritual, or ritualistically abusive environment. But then we say abusive because we're privileged to know something better. Um, but the people that grew up in this context, they simply grow their children in those ways, and it's considered something to be proud of. It's considered a rite of passage. It's considered something that everybody in the lineage go through and makes them a part of the family. And it's considered to be elite to be a part of that family. So when somebody comes and say, wait a second, then they are supposedly violating the sacred in a place where the violation of the sacred was the pride of the lineage. Um, Big shout out to Doug McIntyre. Um, Last interview of Annika Lucas and Doug McIntyre. Um, Again, if you can donate to Annika Lucas' podcast, which will allow her to dedicate more time to doing those interviews. For many of us, it's understanding things that we never had the language to speak about around the context of even our wider lineage. Um, okay, even the people around us, and for people that have been harmed by our lineages, um, or the wider context of our lineages, it is a window into seeing how they think and and how they do that even to themselves. And um, and now to the contribution of Karandra Marshall. So Doug McIntyre is my second shout out, and the third shout out is Karandra Marshall, and she talks about um, most people demand nature to submit. Again, science, just like astronomy, was studied with astrology because we studied the stars to know what they're doing and what we can do with the stars. We studied the paths of the eclipses to know when is a monarchy at risk of falling or changing. Um, One of the people that made great contribution in explaining that is Chris Brennan from Astrology Podcast. Um, and this is what he studies also the historical context of astrology. He teaches Hellenistic astrology. Um, but this is exactly the point. The people are called mathematikoi. They're basically computating the signs of the stars but they were astrologers because we only needed to know what do the stars do to know where to plant the crops. Another big notable name is Tasio that practiced Babylonian astrology the way they practiced Babylonian astrology. So if we understand that, we understand that the scientists were practicing alchemy and were practicing bending nature or the magical tradition from a periscope of submission, which was a periscope of, I'm sorry, ritual abuse to the sexual energy to try to bend people to their will. Mind you, those arts were practiced in the context of empires where emperors would have a harem. And for example, when I discerned the Chinese scholarly thought of and said the sky that punishes the land loses mandate of the heaven, basically denoting to the sky punishing the land as a periscope through which certain of the philosophies of Chinese traditional medicine so um, saw things and how it had affected empires and emperors um, with the notion of the eclipses, then immediately I was presented with the relevant scholarly algorithms, and they were trying to see which would I pick and choose. And one of them was the ladies or the feminists, and one of them were lady emperors that had male harems, which I also disagree with because this lady would be the sky, and those men would be the land. And if she punishes the land and siphons energy from the land, even the female emperor would suffer during an eclipse. And so, again, this is my perspective, and we have to understand that the science was not disconnected from alchemy and the manipulation of sexual energy rather than aligning with sexual energy. And here is the things I talked about: the Egyptians and the pyramids. Okay, the alchemical art of requiring submission from nature. Okay, it's a magical art. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it has caveats. It creates approximation. It creates empires that rise and fall. It doesn't create sovereignty, longevity, and so on and so forth. Um, and this is where the science says, which were offered the patronage to practice the science, were practiced within the context of submission, maybe. And here the people that found within submission a way to have sovereign power exchange, those were the rebellious ones. Okay, and this is also why some of them have decorations on their throats. Okay, it's connected with that. Okay, if I somewhat relate to you on the basis of that, it only proves my point with your being the exceptional out of the group. Okay. And you also know what I set the boundary to, so so you know what I'm talking about. um, but here is the thing, that those patronage were within the context of molestation, sometimes incest, those rites of passage, and they required submission. So our worldview and magical traditions were coming to learn the science as how can we make nature that is the feminine self to submit. In fact, as a philosopher of science, there are a lot of the philosophers seeing the scientific endeavor as the mystery, and the mystery is yin, so it's the feminine, and they were saying, court nature, and she would reveal her secrets to you, which was basically an erotic transcendence that did not exist in the submission context. And even if there was submission, um, the submission should have come from the courting of nature, rather than it should have been what would be closer to relaxed arousal than to misplaced arousal. and that was simply named submission for the lack of better terms. Um, but the notion of court nature and she will reveal her secrets to you is seen nature as a mystery. So when she talks about submission here, we're talking about the patronage science that required bending of nature, required the magical tradition, the emperor to have a magical, the patron to have a magical tradition that bends nature to them, or to have a magician that does that, and then it would be plagiarized or would be practiced in the name of the patron and would be considered a part of the legacy, or in cases like families like the Medicis. And this is why Leonardo da Vinci was such a groundbreaking scientist when he pointed out not to make a nature submit to him, but to observe a nature and describe it, being the first modern empiricist that we know of. And he was, okay, related to the lineage of the patronage of the Medicis. And everybody knows the Leonardo da Vinci statues and art, which we cannot say Medici without saying da Vinci, and we cannot say da Vinci without saying Medici. So this was something that was beginning to break apart the anonymity of the artist, which would usually be ascribed to the emperor's legacy. If you go to, for example, North Korea, nobody knows, at least not within my known context, who built the statue of Kim Jong Un, or the dynasty of Kim Jong Un in who built those big statues. But the Medicis allowed us to know it was Leonardo da Vinci that built all these statues, and that can be ascribed to Christianity to some degree. Okay, the fact that there is a God and the familial patronage is honoring something that's greater than themselves. Um, And now, um, however, what was missing, or what is missing, and I even don't know if at the time of the Medici it was that missing, but what is missing now is something that's beginning to rise, and is the female, or the gnosis, or the yin goddesses that counteract extreme hierarchy. Um, True cohesion again emerges through resonance. True cohesion, and well, I began to coin the term true cohesion with Jupiter in Venus conjoining in Cancer. I see someone that it seems like she has this gnosis within herself, and so this is absolutely not adopting of my term, because I do sense that this is an emerging gnosis, as the words true cohesion, and probably a lot of people receive true cohesion at the Venus-Jupiter conjunction, or at other terms, because Venus is a union, Jupiter is cohesion, and it's truth. And in the sign of Cancer, it was exalted. Resonance, never extraction. Now, this is something that immediately makes me think, because I'm an aromatherapist, so I work with extractions, and extractions really require to heat the plant and use something that's alchemical. It's a very potent, it's kind of like the A bomb of a plant. Um, Master Bain Saduno, and there was a child, yes, there was a child. That gave prophecies. Um, Crassiatasio refers to him. I don't remember the name of the child. And he talked about using the plants as is, being better than all these kind of processes of them. And this makes me think, as an aromatherapist, of something to look into, because because I do work with extractions, which is a very intense process on the plant. Like I said, the Egyptians built pyramid to get the gnosis of releasing the slaves that built the pyramids, and perhaps I'm having such an Egyptian monarchy moment myself. Um, uh, and This is resonance, never extraction. When we talk about extraction, and she also talks about the derivative. Okay, so my previous comment for context, zero rape science brings true cohesion. Um, just because there is a truth to what is said, basically, to understand physics, the gate cannot be violence or rape. Um, Even Richard Feynman talked about atoms and the push and pull. Um, there's a differentiation in pattern. Rape is only yielding approximation. It's a forced derivative of the ebb and flow. Um, okay, the ebb and flow, dams and the ebb and flow is something that Bellanova, Maria Antoinetta Bellanova talks about, the natural ebb and flow, and dams being obstructing of that. I know I'm half Dutch. We live in a country that would not have been possible without dams, and yet it's also imperative to look at what is the holistic meaning of abrupting the ebb and flow of the waters and tending to that, because just as we have technologies underwater that grow life where previously none was grown before because they provide shelter through the technology, and I share that on my Facebook page, it's also coming to question, um, do we have better option than the things that allowed for life but obstructed the ebb and flow up until now? Um, Again, questioning the fundamentals is very 0 degree Aries, which is a great time to have great breakthroughs. So the force derivative is an approximation, um, and and I'm talking also about the derivative of computating chaos. Okay, we use derivatives from the chaotic system in order to try to computate. Yes, those people with Pluto conjuncting Uranus, you guys do that naturally. You are the talismans of chaos theory, which allowed us to manipulate chaos. Thanks to you, we have not only chips in the heart that basically regulate the heart flow, but also chips in the brain that are supposed to regulate brain activity, but unfortunately also do the opposite. So when there is malefic use in those, which can be also to the heart chips, or what they call the brain regulator, brain heart rate regulator. Um, so so a lot of you understood that those approximations allowed for a beating heart to beat, but what risked the heartbeat to begin with was rape. And only now I have a dysnosis. This is not surprising that the West deals a lot with ailments of the moon, cancer, and ailments of the soul, heart, and psychologically of trauma. Yes, relational trauma, which is ailments of the moon and ailments of the sun. Um, and so, in those situations, the approximations allowed us to persist for the heart to continue to beat, even though, or even the notion of um, where I saw people talking about transcendent death when they were ritually tortured, but then they ignore rape. So while it is a bypassing, we have to understand that it's not a bypassing because of stupidity or laziness, but because this is a natural reaction to extreme torture, and that can be the approximation of the near-death experience in life itself and can feel like transcending death, which allows somebody to continue to exist when they weren't allowed to die and they weren't allowed to live. Um, so this is the force derivative, and most of what we know as science is built on that. Um, a science, all science was conceived within an approximate as we see it today. Again, also turned into the cloning project, while cloning allowed us to create life in very weird circumstances. Um, it is also a calling to align with love, not as denial of the rape, um, but as embodiment of something that we've never known before. Um, that is actually loving, that is even more loving than the elated transcendence of the approximation, where people are tortured but then become addicted to these torturous patterns. Um, so humanity knows not. You literally, okay, this is turning to the video of known quantum science, literally describe dissociation as the self, and describe rape-based perception accurately. And this is what a scientific perception is. A person has 12th house Aquarius, then dissolving into the patterns and the sets of patterns is something that does happen. Um, uh, but it is the grand missing. It's basically seeing love as the sets of patterns because we hold on to the sets of patterns that is the closest approximate to something that's actually loving, which we can no longer find in humanity upon being exposed to rape, cultures, traditions, or actions. By the way, whether because it happened to us, or because it happened in spirit to us, or because it happened to someone we love, and so on and so forth, or because it happened to someone we've been in the womb of, and somebody channeled that several years ago, and I don't find this channeler. Um, they were channeling, um, yes, they were channeling a singer. Okay, rape science doesn't just metaphorically violate; it literally fractures water coherence. A motto hate crystal, so this is the crystal science, and again, they try to did anybody that commonly try to do the experiment about the water and the words, um, or they did that with rice because with rice it's more visible, then basically rice grew bad if it was given bad words, and everybody that commonly tried to do that saw it, but somehow the people that hold the microscopes are still within those rape metaphors, and they couldn't discern the water because they themselves were carrying the frequency of the rape. Okay, the observer point of view. Um, Cohesion cannot be raped from the field. Violence extracts approximation. Violence extracts approximation. True science emerges from ebb and flow resonance um, with reality's nature harmonics. Now, I want to say something. People that grew up in extreme climates, whether it's Arctic or areas in China, it's no wonder that people saw the sky as punishing the land. It's because our human self can barely sustain in those climates. People have adapted their philosophy, practices, and rituals to those climates. Mind you, if they came from, let's say, the Middle East up to the poles, okay, and somebody was molesting, somebody was raping, somebody was violating, then it causes persecution to the poles. And then they run away to the poles. If they still practice those persecution, sadness story, okay? Food prices and so on and so forth. But we also have to have the point of grace where people that did not know secure attachment, and they could be growing to loving families within their context. It's just that if the family could not provide a loving, providing, safe and secure nervous system relaxed touch to the infant, okay, then it's going to create the grand missing, and this contributes to creation of misplaced arousal. I know that even now, as I had certain breakdowns in several of the last days, and I felt energetically this supporting touch, I was going into completely infant stage because I didn't receive that loving touch. Not because I wasn't loved, not because not because I grew up to abusive parents, um, because there were a lot of trauma around the time when I was born. Okay, I was born in a year where there was a nuclear leakage in India. So we all know Chernobyl, but we don't know that one. And it's also like everybody remembers Chernobyl, but I went with the trauma that went missing that nobody knew of. And indeed, many of my own traumas I never spoke about because I was a child. I wasn't even thinking to speak about that. And I wasn't even thinking this is trauma. Like I did not have this concept. I just saw very weird things that I was just walking with myself and had not even knowing that something is missing. Okay, so what we didn't know, we didn't know. Um, and right now I am going through my Neptune square. So those natural harmonics, the things that cannot be forced. Well, I am the person that came up with this notion, with the notion of sovereignty as a leading breakthrough in science, in defense, in intelligence, in basically everything, and as something that can make or break a war bigger than the worst that we know, but also prevent a war bigger than the worst that we know if we cultivate it. I myself am going through the in practice of moving towards a love that is actually loving. And sometimes it feels like I'm going to die because that's the closest approximate that I thought it's only after death that people have love. Rape versus resonance science. Um, Rape science, force fit measurements. So this is where she takes my gnosis into actual method. Um, and she says dissociation artifacts, resonance science, ebb and flow entertainment, native field patterns. Okay, so this is where we don't try to create a model within a lab, but we look at the native field patterns, and I think technology allows us to do so. And the derivative of technology from birthing, from orgasmic birthing that is not misplaced arousal, is going to create new technology that is going to allow new observations that allow us to observe the native field patterns in ways we haven't seen before, both organically and with the aid of technology. Um, Trauma encoded water crystals, only 60% coherence reveals authentic phonon signatures. So those basically yield distorted field readings. This is why when I did the ESP, or the Politics of the Senses essay um, in academia, basically they found it difficult to teach psychic readings. People that are survivors of the Gates project would probably resonate. This is probably a part of the reason that they have let you guys go, because you couldn't read it perfectly, and you couldn't read perfectly because they raped you, and um, and they tried to use your psychic ability to something that was not zero rape, and this is why they were only getting 50% or 60% resonance. Um, and this is why they didn't. And this is, by the way, one of my contributions to the intelligence, where rape does not yield true cohesion and causes epic intelligence failures. So, dissociation as the self, exactly what happens. And this is the thing: the more you practice your psychic senses correctly, the more you realize that rape doesn't support your skill, and you have to say no to a lot of missions, jobs, and so on and so forth. I had to do that in my career, in my humdrum career where I couldn't cooperate with corruption, and I did not even know that this stems from that this corruption is intermixed and stemming from rape and leading to rape, and I just naturally said no to it, and I became sick in corrupted or rape-like or rape-supporting environment, even if it is basically a financial scam that could leave families and children submitted to trafficking. Well, I had no problem charging a lot of money for services where people had the money to pay. I had, in fact, I had so much, I have so much abundance mindset that I had zero problem with luxury pricing, luxury products, as long as there's no corruption intermixed. And the only thing that stopped me was basically because I was thinking of having a luxury product lining because this where I believed I would have bigger margins. Um, and then have fully subsidized for people that cannot pay for solutions. But then I learned about cloning projects and what the elite does to their own lineage, and this is exactly the point. The more competent we are, the more we realize that we need secure attachment, relaxed arousal as a setting of the life energy with which we discover and manifest. Okay, I'm speaking something here that usually people would have to go through shit ton of rape and being rapists to the gate of learning those 6 9 methods. It's considered the knowledge of the elite, but this is refinement on the knowledge that the elite received. And that is um, and that's the pinnacle of science. Um, it's not just reaching the pinnacle, but having that in relaxed arousal rather than misplaced arousal, and knowing that probably none of my relatives has ever. A relative in the room right now. Dissociation. Zero rape science. um, Zero rape science. And it takes that discernment. This is where people were in misplaced arousal and nobody get that they were not wanting something. And you know, with people like Annika Lucas being trafficked by her mom, fortunately my mother did not. But there were times they were really afraid of that lack of discernment. Um, okay, we're competent people, and that makes us abundant people in our mindset, even though we don't necessarily have that in material essence. And when it comes to business thinking, or for example, when my mother said that um, Ivanka, Ivanka Trump was a better businesswoman than Donald Trump, something in me relaxed a little bit. Not because I don't see the business merit of them both and see how my refinement can contribute to even better business. um, but because and Belanova has a video where she talked about the Trumps um, and this cult-like trafficking that involved the Epstein. Rather than talking about crimes against humanity, I want to address it as the grand missing. Because this is also the way to antidote and to recover. Um, it's understanding that that was the grand missing, and if the grand missing is not denying ourselves life, but actually reaching there with relaxed arousal, reaching there not from patterns of addictions and obsession, but from actual joy and love, and that is actually loving. Um, and that was missing. And actually, we can say, well, you can reach heights, but it would be like what the Epstein was up until that gnosis. It would be the approximate, and it can have merit, but and you could get away with, but it would be the approximate. It would not be the thing in itself. there's a grand missing to it. And why wait until you die to experience a love that is real? Um, because the people that went out, if I take a look at Alondra would have been Epstein. And the fact that, and I'll even tell you that, um, how should I say that? Those who make it first always have it the hardest. And this is basically because they're groundbreaking. If you're expecting that you're going to have as difficult time discerning relaxed arousal from misplaced arousal as Annika Lucas had, feeling through everything that she's gone through and having no framework of reference in therapy to do so, then worry not. You're not going to grow through the harshest realities that people like Alondra Mountauk, or even me or Annika Lucas, each with our separate struggles, has went through necessarily because we've already embarked and we've already opened the timeline, and that timeline is already accumulating by the masses. Bellanova, for me, her gnosis that the children that were prematurely separated or the children that did not receive relaxed nervous system touch by their parents, even if they had loving parents, okay, they were more susceptible to misplaced arousal. It's something I was dealing with all my life. Now there's a lady that clearly says that, and I'm like, that wasn't there. It was my gnosis, because I saw that people that were raped and had arousal from the rape, they called it misplaced arousal. And they are so cult like something that I didn't even know to name it. And I was like, well, but the sex there is not really sexy. And this is why my experiences that were basically rapey with people that initially I had some attraction to, but it was because both of us were missing the grand missing, which is secure attachment and relaxed arousal. Um, and there was, even in the psychology, there was nobody there, because even the psychologists didn't have that. Okay, and I was taking the responsibility to heal myself, because they said a person needs to be at least partially healed to even go to psychologist. But then I exceeded where the psychologist was, and it threatened my life. Um, so, I also want people to understand that the very fact that those conversations are happening as a groundbreaking of the sciences. Aries, the planet of cloning, and so on and so forth, she will move into Taurus, which is a female sign, and well, we try to create the superhuman, and there was use of rape as transcendence. I think Aries might be exploring union as transcendence, and um, and I really cannot predict what she will do there. I know Adolf Hitler was born with Aries um, in Pisces, and he longed for the motherland, or to be included in the grand motherland. But he also longed to be included in war. But then his Jupiter was in Aries, so his Jupiter was already in Aries. I don't know about the people that had Aries in Pisces, but I'm one of the people that have Moon square Aries, which means that sometimes it's even difficult for me to believe my scientific revelations. And there you see how this woman just so naturally, eloquently describes something that I would feel that I would never be believed, which pertain to, first of all, my taking a break from academia, because how would I defend my thesis in front of a group where there are many pedo ring leaders that this counteracts their relational experience. Um, But also even the story about the water, because we were told there's only one experiment, but it was only one experiment because of these things that I previously mentioned. I was like, well, nobody would believe me when I would talk about this type of field of science, and it actually made me more profound in the accurate or in the distinct science, which led me to astrology and be able to predict scientific revolutions through astrology. Okay, which is probably, I predicted that people have, that the 12th house in astrology is what people bring, is what their scientific or philosophy or whichever big contribution to the world, particularly if they bring it to the 10th and the 11th or the 9th. And I bring Pluto in Aquarius from my 12th house, which means I bring the gnosis of scientific revolutions and Renaissance periods. And I even ran into what would be the next Renaissance period, which is Neptune conjoining Aries, sextiling Rahu and Chiron, and um, and had a conversation in the context of the Medicis. So yeah, uh, yeah. There was even a person that tried to traffic me. Noted that he noted, I don't know if he wanted to steal my creative endeavor. I think that people don't need to steal, and they would probably have, he has sun in Beta per se. So if he honors zero rape society, he will have discovered in himself his creative abilities of his own origin, and he wouldn't need to steal from anyone. And the fact that he tried to traffic me or to siphon my energy or whatnot, was also showing me of my talents, which was very weird because it's a very weird way to find out. But when I was doing the bisextile, it was the equation and seeing how the equation is the astrology. When I write the symbols of the astrology, and it's basically an equation being alchemized into matter. Um, and yes, and pottery. I was shown pottery, and they were like, "Well, it's very related to you. It's very related to you." So they saw something in me regarding that, but the issue was the trafficking issue, um, and because I think they were Satanist, and either they wanted um, to siphon that energy, but they were genuinely and authentically um, recognizing my talents or what my essence is, um, which is very weird because they couldn't have identified that without having that essence in themselves, and then they grow into believing that they have to rape, believing that they have to siphon energy, believing that they have to steal, um, and being enmeshed with human trafficking webs and extortion codes. Um, so yeah. um, People know that people acknowledge their talent, but sometimes behind their back they try to steal or plagiarize. And I'm like, that's for no reason. Like, if you identify my talent, it means that you have something in you that not just sees talent, but is the embodiment of it, and you don't have to steal my energy. It means that you have to reconnect with your own. Um, and that means, and I do believe that people wouldn't have to go through this much torture as the survivors went through, um, because the world is changing, because we're crossing through that threshold. Um, Dissociation as the self. Exactly what happened when consciousness fractures. Again, trauma and rape fracture consciousness from the field unity through violation. Okay, and then people have the approximation of unity, but they're told to ignore rape to have the approximation of unity, and it's not, and it's the approximation. Okay, because this, what we dissociate will keep calling us, but again, um, It's not about shame and blame, and it's not about being intellectually lazy or anything like that. It's about the fact that this is the result of the fragmentation, and the fragmentation calling to cohesion. Um, and they try to reach the gnosis through rape, and it's not, and it always calls to discern and go into love that is actually loving and relaxed arousal. And now that gate can look like suffering because there was suffering. Um, so I don't have an answer to that. Um, and saying, okay, your somatic knowing sees through QFT particle illusion straight to the relational holoflux beneath. And this is exactly the point. It was the relational trauma, and then curating from relational trauma. Basically, now here's the thing: people are in elated dissociation or manic state. Um, then that's the closest that they know to happiness, and they don't know that there is another happiness. But when they don't acknowledge that, wait a second, you got there through rape. Let's talk about love that is actually love, and let's talk about relaxed arousal. Let's talk about something is truly orgasmic. Now, the oxytocin and all the neurotransmittants in relaxed arousal, they are basically dissolving the trauma. And then you go into relaxed arousal rather than shaming for the joy in the torture, which was meant to dissolve torture, but to allow one to reach a relaxed arousal from a safe, sane and consensual embodied place. And it takes nervous system studies, even plants, teachers like geranium that go into the nervous system and the vagus nerve. I would usually say essential oil, but I just think, whether it's essential oil or the plant itself, maybe you don't even need essential oil. I don't know, okay? Because I've never been through crossing that gate without the oils. So this is where that is something that can um, that you have to keep in mind, because while people went through feeling all their traumas and feeling all the pain, um, relaxed arousal that is coming from embodied place is already allowing, kind of like the closest approximation would probably be MDMA allowing the uh, the love buffer to process the trauma. And again, none of these methods are bad. It's just that it doesn't necessarily mean that you would have to use uh, MDMA or even essential oils, or feeling all the pain without having a love buffer that allows to feel and to heal. Um, because there was a reason the body dissociated. There was a reason consciousness fragmented, and and yeah, zero rape science, your 13 to 20% margin ethic made explicit. No forcing field excitation into unnatural states. By the way, this reminds me, I'm sorry, science is just so sexy. So, um, along Uranus ingress to Taurus, many people went from using vibrators to using dildos or even crystal dildos for the same reason, because they were forcing orgasm, and we didn't learn how to reach orgasm through relaxed arousal, even by using sex toys, which was sex positive or sexual sovereignty. For example, when I was in high school, I bought dildo as an act of sexual sovereignty, okay, not being ashamed and so on. Um, and then there was the confusion of how to enjoy with that. Like I was learning something new that allowed me to have control over something that related to me somehow being exposed to experience of people that didn't have that control over. And then they were programmed to enjoy something that was not possible to enjoy in life. Okay. I was exposed to satanistic sexuality in some way, and I knew that there's something missing,